So joining us on Zoom tonight, we've got Mike and Mark and Rannigan and David. And with me here at the Zendo tonight, I've got Glenn and Kimberly and Joe and Chris and Jill. So we're going to be looking at chapter 12 in Ben's book, which he titles, "This Really Matters," which is potentially a pretty gripping, grabbing title. But maybe I should read this one. Even if I skip some of the chapters, maybe not this one, because this one really matters. Right? But what is this? Is it pointing to this chapter? It's kind of fuzzy. It's just this. It's not really pinned down. So it's definitely an indefinite article here, it seems. This, but it really matters, whatever this is. So there's that element of reality. And the fact that it matters, it has impact. It's consequential. Although for people trained in the discipline of philosophy, we can't help but call to mind the old response to attempts to set up mind-matter dualism: no matter and never mind, but never mind. So that's our way, handy-dandy way of just discharging the whole thing. Let's get down to what really does matter, which isn't what matter or mind, although Ben kind of privileges mind here in this chapter in a way that I don't take issue with. So we'll get into that too. We just need to be careful about setting up mind as some sort of metaphysical entity is all. So the line from the Song of Dharma that this chapter is a commentary on is one moment of mind is immeasurable eons. Which certainly points to one of the key aspects of our practice. So this really does matter in terms of seeing the truth that one moment of mind means this moment of mind. It doesn't require conglomeration of moments of mind. Any moment of mind will do. So why not this one? Since it's ready to hand. And there's always one ready to hand. So taking this moment of mind and seeing that within it is immeasurable eons. It sounds pretty heady stuff, like, wow, yeah, that's profound. I'm willing to buy into that, right? But what does it really equate to? How can we make it relevant for our concerns today? So for me, I immediately start thinking along these lines. The sixth extinction Means the sixth, not the sixth species to become extinct, but rather the sixth mass extinction event. The fifth one happened about 66 million years ago. That's the asteroid that took out the dinosaurs and a large percentage of all other living beings. So the sixth extinction, of course, is the one that we're the asteroid. It's colliding with Earth. And with that in mind, in terms of pointing towards the future and these immeasurable eons. So I know it's a common question that everybody has arising in their mind about how does this practice relate to these huge issues we're confronted with. And certainly the sixth extinction could be deemed one of the biggest ones. A lot is at stake there. And our practice is about one moment of mind. Caring for it mindfully, our wisdom is rooted in this moment of mind. So the common response to that might be, well, that's the most inconsequential thing there could be. Why are you getting hung up on just whatever's arising right now? Why is that your focus? But it's from that germination point, and it can only be from that germination point. That's kind of the crux of the matter here, is that's the only way that we can reach into these immeasurable eons, is through this one moment of mind. It's all we have. Everything else are just mind fabrications, which are in themselves one moment of mind. You're having a thought, and it's leading to the next thought, the next thought. So it's not that that's necessarily something that we should be avoiding, but we need to understand that its grounding is in one moment of mind. And how do we care for that? How does that guide our activity right here and now? So that the miracle of mindfulness and the practice of it is deeply rooted in just this idea. Shouldn't even say this idea, this practice of mindfulness, of being aware this moment. And through that awareness, the impact we can have. So when I read a statement like this, one moment of mind is immeasurable eons. That's how I envision the import of it. So that if we have an angry response to the conditions that are bringing about what may well be the sixth extinction, then we need to be aware of that. And is that not only an appropriate response, but a response that's going to be helpful? And in what fashion can it be helpful? So we need to, purpose of this talk isn't to guide us through that evaluation, but rather it's to present to you the importance that we have that awareness of whatever mental states are arising. How can this help me address the issue that's of concern to me? So, I mean, and we need to go into that open-mindedly. We certainly have things like precepts to serve as a guidepost for us. If it's a feeling, let's say, of anger. But the anger per se can simply function as an alarm system, kind of like an alarm system in a commercial enterprise. If it goes off, it alerts. There could be a fire, could be a burglary underway, something's going on. So go check that out. So anger can be responded to in a similar way. Something's going on, something needs to be looked into. So if we didn't have anger arise, then maybe this sort of thing wouldn't elicit any response. Maybe we'd just be okay. And I rather suspect there are some views of contemplative practice, which would include Buddhism, some views of that type of practice that might see it that way. Just kind of remove yourself. But looking at who's present here tonight, I don't have to worry about any of you taking that mistaken view, in my estimation. So we are. That's the whole reason for studying this text about interdependence. That these other species are us. We're intimately connected. So we cannot ignore it. To do so is delusion. To ignore it is ignorance, quite literally. So the importance of each moment of mind. And it just so happens that this book by Elizabeth Colbert, not a Buddhist to my knowledge, but one of her quotes in the beginning comes from the Argentinian poet and essayist Jorge Luis Borges. Centuries of centuries, and only in the present do things happen. So, bam. Just synchronicity. I pull this off from the shelf because of this topic, and then lo and behold, one of her two opening quotes. Centuries of centuries. There are hundreds and hundreds of years, and not as ambitious as the immeasurable eons, but it's going in that same direction. But only in the present do things happen. Only now, right now. This one moment of mind. So I did want to spend just a wee bit of time. I didn't want to make a whole talk based on it, but I touched on it already. So let's go a little bit further, because this next quote from Ben's commentary kind of forces us to anyway. He says, there is a tendency in Buddhist teachings to speak of things not as absolutely existing objects that are observed, but as direct experiences. So we're back to this issue about things. And relative to direct experiences. So our direct experiences are what we would term mental phenomena. But if we set up a basis for that mental phenomenon of mind, which means it's distinguished from something else, like physicality, matter, then our understanding of the Dharma immediately sets off an alarm. Speaking of alarms, that I'm entering into the dualistic realm, and realm comes up a few times in this poem, and we're going to be talking about it a little bit further in this chapter. But to be in the realm of non-duality kind of forces us to back off from metaphysical speculation. So what Ben's referencing here, and what not all Buddhists, in fact, I think I'm going to have occasion to reference the Abhidharma, which is why I brought this book along. One of the probably the most accessible text on Abhidharma, which means it's a contemporary. It's not some old Sanskrit, and it's titled Abhidharma in Daily Life. But Abhidharma, and I've mentioned this in previous talks occasionally, Abhidharma does really treat these mental objects as things. So that was a stumbling block for me in terms of my dive into Abhidharma, because I was pretty much all in on the Mahayana teachings on emptiness. So it just was a roadblock to me. But what the great value that's still to be gleaned from Abhidharma and the impact it's had on other more Mahayana-oriented schools of what I'll call Buddhist psychology is grounded in this sense of how we do come to experience things and how those experiences then impact our future activity and engagement. And Ben gets into that in a fair amount of detail in this chapter. So this one moment of mind is immeasurable eons, is saying one moment of mind. And last week when I brought William Blake into the mix, we were also covering this territory. One moment of mind is the entirety. But that's true for everything. And we can take a very expansive view of mind. So it's not that because we're these supreme beings. Everything, by its nature, has this Buddha nature, that it's immeasurable eons. Immeasurable being another word for boundlessness, beyond measure. So to speak of things not as absolutely existing objects, but as direct experiences. So some of you are familiar with phenomenology, a late 19th and 20th century school of thought, which was their way of returning to the things themselves, was by looking at our experience. How do we experience this? the phenomenon. So it does have parallels to recent thought, which is still very much with us and having an impact on our view of reality outside of Buddhism. When we're looking at direct experiences. And Ben gives an example. And for those of you that have been with us for a while, before the Jukai class started working on the way of the Bodhisattva, we had looked at the 4 foundations of mindfulness, Satipatthana Sutra. So that's what Ben is referencing in this next section of the chapter I wanted to talk a bit about, where he says the commitment to mindfulness of the body that pervades Buddhist thought is not about objectifying and manipulating the body, but rather it is about becoming deeply intimate with the experience of the body itself, what we term the body. But it's actually our experience of the body. But because of our conception, our conceptualization of that experience, we immediately turn it into a thing. We objectify it. But the Dharma that we're studying here is strongly rooted in the experience. And when we follow that, we can see, even because the mindfulness of the body is the first foundation of mindfulness. So it's the beginning of mindfulness practice. And the beginning of the beginning is the breath. So, and we still to this day use that in teaching meditation. At least I certainly do. To be mindfully aware of each in-breath, each out-breath as a starting point. That's not the entirety, but that's a beautiful place to begin. And it's not about objectifying anything. It's just being present with the experience. So it's really important here to kind of come back to this basic aspect of Buddhist teaching, especially within the Mahayana. It's these direct experiences that we are looking at, that we are studying, and the Dogen-esque sense of study. To study is to become intimate with. And to study Zen is to study the self. And the type of study he's talking about isn't the objectified study, where we form a bunch of beautiful concepts and interrelate them and everything. It's rather to become intimate in terms of really becoming the experience, really going very deeply into that. Because that's the source. Everything else is flowing out of that. And we do have these capabilities to conceptualize. We have the abilities to form words, to connect those, so we can objectify things and really create some incredible blueprints of reality through these words and concepts. But what's the source? Where does this emanate from? And by being able to go back and see the source, we can then take a look at our conceptual frameworks I'll call it with beginner's mind, in terms of being able to not be bound by our conditioned way of seeing them, but rather of seeing them, uh, I'll use the term more purely, insofar as we're going back to their ultimate source to see how do they come forth? What is their basis? And to thereby be able to let go of the need to objectify, that we become very comfortable working with the experiences. And when we do move on to conceptualization, where our relationship to those concepts shifts from what it used to be. We can see them now as just really tools, skillful means. Not some sort of literally kind of like a Ten Commandments type of process where, or a Holy Scripture type process where these concepts are presented and this is the reality. So we have ways of really solidifying these concepts and making them more powerful, really, is what it comes down to. So that we can wield the concepts almost like weapons. And that's kind of what intellectual arguments are about. And Buddhism's not real hot on those for good reason. For good reason. Buddhists tend to want to look at the direct experience. What's going on? That's all. And just to kind of insert here, the importance of this in connection with the teaching about the interdependence of all things, because it really allows us to open our minds to the true grandeur of that teaching, as opposed to the objectification of it, which is turning it into just the myriad objects. But rather, this connection, and this brings us back to this line of the poem again, one moment of mind, just this. So we could now make that any of the myriad things, is immeasurable eons, is the entirety. That's beyond any conceptualization, categorization. So that the two are intertwined. They're dependent upon each other. Speaking of interdependence, the one moment of mind and the immeasurable eons. The myriad things and the whole universal web in its totality. They're one and the same. They are no different. They're just different ways of seeing it. So it's kind of our conceptual mind really trying to grow, like groping the elephant. We're groping with this notion here of Indra's net, and we're groping around to see, well, what is this? And our concepts are even better than our hands as groping mechanisms. We use concepts to grope all over the place. And that's why the importance of just this intimate understanding of our direct experience. What is really there? The source. And when that's our grounding, now, these lofty teachings like the oneness of all things, we're traveling territory that more closely connects us with that truth when we're down to that level. One of the places we really get caught up with our conceptualization is because we think, and to some extent this is valid, we think we are, if not the only beings with that capacity, that our capacity for that is much greater than any other beings. So that kind of makes us something special. But if we can bring it back to what underlies those concepts, now we're on territory that we share in a similar vein with even plants. The more we learn about plants and how they communicate, why is our way so much better than their way? And they've been around a lot longer than we've been. So just on that basis alone, I think they have a valid argument to present that maybe that's a superior way. Time will tell. If we're still around 400 million years or so in the future. Each sensation in the body, coming back to this mindfulness of the body, each sensation of the body is a citta, C-I-T-T-A, a moment of experience, a moment of mind. So citta is like consciousness, and it has several different meanings. And Abhi speaks to that. And there's one point here from the Abhidharma that I wanted to also pull in here because it's an important point. This is where the author says, why are people so different from one another? The reason is that they have different experiences in life, and thus they accumulate different inclinations. And then a little further on, he says, our life is an uninterrupted series of cittas, and each citta conditions the next citta, and this again the next. And thus the past can condition the present. And of course, the present then conditions the future. And so we have this what's being presented here, kind of a basic sense of karma, you could almost say. And also the uniqueness of the individual. And that's an important point I wanted to bring into this, what we're talking about here tonight. One moment of mind is this uniqueness. Each moment of mind is totally unique. Whereas immeasurable eons, we can't even talk in terms of uniqueness because of its boundlessness and its non-duality. When we're calling something unique, it's kind of a way of comparing it to other things in its uniqueness, how it's different from other things. So in terms of the relationship between the relative and the absolute, which is at its heart, that's what this chapter is about, is that interrelationship. So the relative, the particular, is the world of differentiation, of the unique. But, and this is the beautiful thing, for me at least, about this deep Dharma teaching of difference and unity, is that within that realm, interpenetrated with it, is this realm of oneness, of harmony. So you'll see the term used, and I think Ben brings it in occasionally, about not being hindered. And this is that sense that within the realm of the particular, that there is this free flowing that's also taking place through interdependence. And Ben, as we're very aware, he's written a couple of books on the Yogacara teachings, and Vasubandhu, and the Three Natures. He talks about how in Yogacara there is the idea that everything we experience is merely mind. In fact, that's kind of what Yogacara gets translated as, is the mind-only school of Buddhism. And then maybe one of the most important points I wanted to pull out of this chapter is actually taken from the Flower Garland Sutra, not the poem. And from the sutra, the line I'm speaking of is, the triple world is mind only. And Ben says one could argue that this is the most famous line in the Avatamsaka Sutra. Now, these three realms that the triple world is referencing, I also don't want to spend too much time talking about this because it's really not that germane. The three realms here refers to places one can live and states one can experience through meditation. The desire realm, the subtle materiality realm, and the immaterial realm. And these are also often related to the practice of the jhanas. That's just my addition to shed a little more light on it. But there are various ways to talk about even the three realms. Sometimes I never know when I hear a teaching about the three worlds or the three realms, which schematic they're referring to. Sometimes it's three times, past, present, and future. Those could be seen as the three realms. So rather than getting caught up on what this particular list is, what I will say, and this is what I use as my guideline for encountering these teachings, rather than hitting the stop button and scratching my head, well, which realms are we talking about? Doesn't matter most of the time. Now, what it's pointing to is the entirety, everything. So the triple world is mind only. With that notion in mind is just saying everything is mind only. Everything that we encounter, that we experience, all of our knowledge is grounded in mind only. Now, having said that, with that grounding, you could be a full-blown materialist. But your theory of materialism is rooted in mind only. I mean, that's the truth of the matter. You know, matter is an idea. And, you know, back in my student days, there was a early 20th century common sense philosopher, which means he was British, of course, G.E. Moore. And he took issue with this mind-only stuff. And he was said to have gone and kicked a stone. So ever since that, you know, a philosopher's uniform includes work boots with the steel toes. In case you have occasion in a class to try to disprove the mind-only school. best to be well prepared for that. But of course, that didn't refute anything. But to a lot of people, I would have said, you go. That's what I'm talking about. If that's not a demonstration, I don't know what is. But no, didn't establish anything that would circumvent this notion that the triple world, everything, is mind only. So interdependence is mind only. Important. And as long as we're into this and Ben's expertise within the Yogacara, there he goes into a little more detail with it. Processes of mind such as emotion, thinking, perception, and bodily actions are creating the conditions for the realms where we will live. Creating the conditions for the realms where we will live. And the overall realm we could call samsara. So that's exactly what are these mental factors, emotion and thinking and perception, our bodily actions, are being carried out in the samsaric realm. And what you experience is the result of actions. So then the import of practice. It's an activity. It's not just mind only. Doesn't mean we're just sitting around letting our imagination run wild. Maybe we could call it the daydreamers school of Zen. That wing of mind only. They kind of took a wrong turn there. But because Zen is a practice, right, that's why it's grounded in our actions. So the practice of Zazen is an activity. It's just like doing any other ritual. Taigen Dan Layton described it in a famous text of his as Zazen as ritual enactment. So a kind of enacting prajna ritualistically by this practice of Zazen. But it's an embodiment, an activity. And it's through our activities, various activities, that are also kind of the shape of our interrelatedness. How do we relate to others in terms of our activity among others, our practice? And how does that shape us in terms of our future activities and our understanding? So by practicing mindfully with full awareness of these things, of these realms we travel in, we can begin to live an awakened life. And maybe the last point to make here, because it's a beautiful way, I think, to wrap up these teachings I've been sharing here this evening, is where Ben says, human flourishing and the flourishing of all our plant and animal kin are here in our most tiny actions. And that comes right after he says, this moment of mind is as vast as all time, which is just a restatement of what we started with, the line from the poem. It is in the process of creation with everything. So that's another important term, even though it's a concept for me, of creation, creativity. It's in the process of creation with everything. This moment of mind is in the process of creation with everything. And that's flourishing. That's flourishing. So for instance, people that were at No Kings this past Saturday, being out there with others, I gather there was an overall sense of flourishing. But this was really powerful, to be able to creatively engage with other people. And what Ben points out here, by including all beings, the flourishing of all our plant and animal kin, this is true for them also. Flourishing in their most tiny actions. And after Ben returns to Dogen a bit more, tying it in with Uji being time, but we kind of aired that out a fair amount last week, I think. But he does talk about something that we can't repeat too often, that the practice of this school, practice of Soto Zen, is to care for what is right here. Hopefully I've driven that point home sufficiently over the course of however many talks I've given in a career of teaching. To care for what is right here. So I think pretty much covered what I wanted to from that chapter. But it was a rich chapter, so this was a talk I would stick primarily to. So I always be truthful. But I'll bow out and we have some time for any of your thoughts or questions. David.
Hey, Dean. So this is kind of a type of question that I come to a lot, and it was teed up by you bringing up the book about the human cause extinction.
Yeah.
And so that made me think of the 5 remembrances. And I think I pulled them up here, but the fourth is everything changes, more or less. That's outside of my control. And then going to where Ben comes back to Dogen at the end here, and he talks about cultivating great mind.
Yeah.
And he says, this is the mind that does not discriminate a vast space where everything that happens can occur without disturbing us.
Yeah.
And so, like, I think the thing I often think about reconciling is like, is the way to approach something like the human cause extinctions that we're putting into the world, where it's like, is the appropriate way to approach it doing everything you can in your experience, in your moment, to prevent that, but also not being so attached to, like, again, the idea of existence for these particular creatures and species is like a must, that it's causing you suffering. Like, is that the right way to hold that?
Well, I mean, I think it's a natural way to hold that. I don't want to start referencing right and wrong. I'm not comfortable with that, but it's certainly not something that I think we'd try to turn away from and say, "Oh my gosh, I'm concerned about these mass extinctions that we're well in the midst of already." So I think that's a natural response. Even I would term it natural, aside from any Dharma practice, any spiritual practice. I think it's just kind of rooted within us because of the truth of interdependence. So I think it kind of harkens back to what I was saying earlier about the alarms going off when things are really not promoting well-being. Quite the opposite. That we should actually step back and look very closely at that. Say, what's going on? What's creating this? And Dharma has certainly tools to help us in that. Things like the 3 poisons can go a long way towards highlighting what leads to that, and this sense of self and our egoic nature also becomes to the point where our primary motivation is one of feeding the self. And any other considerations pretty much fall to the wayside. So I think we can begin to kind of find our way. Maybe we could call it groping a bit, but we're trying to understand how did we end up in such a screwball scenario here? It's crazy. Koyanis Katsi, crazy life. I mean, that's what we live in, is Koyanis Katsi. And how can I, as a caring being, how can I conduct my life in a way that is of benefit to others? Without what I always am trying to caution is about setting some sort of overarching goal, objective, and ideal. But rather, that's the power for me of Soto Zen practice, of coming back to this present moment and taking care of this constantly. That's our way. If, as Dogen says, if you don't know the way right before you, you can't even get started. So that's what we need to know, is the way right before us, right here and now. And to have these guidelines, which is why we do the full moon ceremony here every month, to kind of ingrain that by chanting it. You know, we don't learn it like a catechism, but it gets kind of, we become more intimate with it. So we really take it in. And maybe now it's become something that can inform our daily life. So,
Thank you, Dean.
does that address what you were?
Yeah, I think, right, especially at the end too, when you brought up Dogen saying, if you don't know what's right in front of you, you know, how can you know the way? I think that is a good thing for me.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and his exact words now are coming to me. How will you know the way as you walk? So you have to know the path right before you in order to know the way as you walk through your day. What's right here, right now? And you know, for most of us with fairly active lives, you know, that's moving place to place. Environments are shifting, but we still, you know, we know our way. We know our way. We don't have to have everything pre-planned. We'll find our way. Anything else? Looks like not. Or Joe?
In Yogacara, mind only, it seems like the focus is on the particular, on the individual, as far as mind only yoga, rather than the universal, that it comes down to what I'm thinking in particular. And that's my world, that's my universe. I'm creating that, or it's been created in me as far as this ongoing process of growing up in a society and so forth, that it's mind only in me. And I don't know anything what's going on in your mind or your whatever, but
Right.
it's not universal. Is that?
No, I think it's a blending of the two, but it's certainly strongly rooted in the individual. But also looking at the universal aspects of it, so that for everyone it's unique. So everybody has their own storehouse consciousness where all the seeds are that are going to help guide us. But because of the commonality, you know, we can actually talk about things in terms that can be meaningful for everybody. That can be accurately reflecting what everybody experiences. But as part of that, to recognize that everybody's experience is separate and unique. So I don't think the two are in any conflict. So you're right, Yogacara is very much about the individual. But that doesn't mean that it's ignoring the universal. The universal runs throughout it, is my sense of it. Mm-hmm. Okay.
I vow to myself
myself and to each of you, to commit myself daily to the healing of our world and the welfare of all beings, to live on earth more lightly and less violently in the food, products, and energy I consume, to draw strength and guidance from the living earth, the ancestors, the future generations, and my brothers and sisters of all species, to support others in our work for the world, and to ask for help when I need it, to pursue a daily practice that clarifies my mind, strengthens my heart, and supports me in observing these vows. All right. Good night, everybody.
Nice, thank you, Dean.